Hello everybody. Today we are discussing whose king is safer and how do we understand that. It's black to play in this position, folks. I want you to look at this position and tell me whose king is safer. Is it the white king who is on g4, and yes, you're seeing a king on g4, or the black king on f8? Which king is safer and why? Folks, I'm showing you these examples today because I believe in the value of this training. Why? Because the king's safety is the most important factor in chess, right? Checkmate ends the game. So when you look at a position, you should first and foremost judge the king's safety because that will shape your moves, that will shape your calculations, right? Evaluation, we are training the evaluation skill in this video as well. Finally, we are doing this because this has crucial ramifications in a practical game. For example, I've seen many players just hand waving and refusing to make a pawn move around the king, thinking that that will weaken their king, right? That's a very common calculation mistake, hand waving. So by engaging in this training, by looking at such striking examples, we're also defeating that hand waving issues. Folks, surprisingly perhaps, in this position, the king on g4 is much safer than the king on f8. It looks incredible, and we'll discuss why. Why do you think this king on g4 is much safer than the king on f8? I have a couple of arguments, folks. Well, first of all, my pawns are covering my king nicely. Second of all, who can attack the white king? Black has no manpower to directly engage in an attack against my king. A weakness in chess is not a weakness if it cannot be exploited. In this particular position, there is no way for black to attack and exploit the position of the king on g4. Yes, you might say, this extra space on the king side acting like a shield protecting the white king on g4. But look at the black king, right? There are ideas like queen h8, f5, opening up the e-file once knight moves, and you actually face huge threats on the king side. Just take a step back. Forget about the first surface features of the king on g4, but look deeply in this position. Analyze it further. You will understand that the king on f8 is more unsafe than the king on g4. Striking example, if black tries d4, obviously white should play c4 and keep everything closed, right? Look at the pawn on d4, a piece of wood that is getting in the way of the black pieces. Thus, white is getting ready for the next push. If black goes king d7, try to exploit this diagonal. What should white do here, folks? You tell me. Yes, we have no phantom fears. We push f5, we block the diagonal, we hit the knight, and if the knight moves, then there are some issues that is facing the black king. For example, queen h8 mate, voila, right? That was my point, that in this position, the black king was much more insecure, in fact, after the move king g4. That's a variation from Anatoly Karpov's game, and that was Karpov's idea in this position, to play king g4, and he said the king is completely safe because who can attack this king, right? Again, concrete analysis rather than hand waving. We can look at some variations, d4, c4, maybe rook e8. Well, surprisingly, white can push further and go g6 in this position, try to activate and try to create further weaknesses around the black king. Notice that there is no way for black to exploit the move g6. The king on g4 is still very safe. After, for example, f6, you can't even do that because then you basically collapse like this. Queen takes g7 check, as you understand, exploiting the pin, and white wins. And after g6, if you take on g6, well, after bishop g6, again, my pieces are much more active. The rook cannot do this because of this mate. You see it, right? You see the problems. And if the rook has to move, then this knight is going to be lost, basically. Just leave this position on the board, and I want you to observe, right, how concrete analysis is much more important than those surface features in chess. And a weakness is not a weakness if it cannot be exploited. So by engaging in such puzzles, we are defeating this hand waving concept, and you will become much more concrete chess player. You won't have phantom fears. Let's continue this analysis, folks. In this position, my question is this: whose king is safer Is it the one on G1 or the one on G8? Please stop the video and judge for yourself. How would you treat this question? That's a beautiful game of Alekhine, folks. And in this position, the black king is more secure than the white king. Well, because simply there are more pawns, right, covering the black king. That came from Caro-Kann-Tartakov variation. And, well, there are double pawns, but the main function in the middle game for those pawns is to protect the black king, right? Like an extra layer of protection. The black king is very secure in this position, but the white king is not so secure because there are already some issues on those light squares and there are less pawn cover around the king, and that's exactly why. Right now we are connecting this to a queen trade, because whenever there's a queen trade option, the first question you must ask yourself is, whose king is safer, right? Now we are forming connections. Another advantage of judging the king's safety properly is that your exchange operations will become much stronger. In this case, should black trade the queens or not? Obviously not. Queen h5 was Alekhine's choice, and he kept all the tension on the board and took it from there, right? The white king is not as secure as the black king, so no queen trade. It's simple as that, right? Once you ask yourself this key question, once you properly judge the king's safety, then your strategic play will improve. In a position like this, that's a final function of this training. If you took the queens off the board, suddenly the king is so much secure, right? The white king just loved to see this queen trade, and suddenly it's white who has a better pawn structure. And if you go to pure pawn endgame, it's white who's going to be winning this pure pawn endgame, because they can create a pass pawn, they have a healthy majority, while black's crippled pawns cannot generate a passed pawn on the king side, right? You see the connection? We are forming connections. That's the right way of learning any material, and this knowledge will remain with your brain for the rest of your life, basically, right? Now you're having deeper processing by asking the why questions. Another position, folks, it's white to play in this position. I want you to judge, first of all, whose king is safer. That's the first question. First, judge it properly for yourself. If you look at both kings, whose king is safer? I'm sure you came to the same conclusion. The white king is so much safer than the black king. Why? Because there are already some pawn weaknesses by pawns pushed to g5, but also it's about the pieces, right? White pieces are much better placed than the black counterparts. There are sleeping pieces on the queen side for black. There is no way for black pieces to attack the white king, but we can envision, right, white pieces soon attacking the poor king on g8. That's our first observations from this position. Now you judge it properly. The question is this: should white take on d4 or should white go to c7? I give you two choices. Now it's your turn. You will stop the video and you will tell me which move is stronger and why. You're a great player, folks, if you came up with Alekhine's move, queen c7 in this position, and it's a complete disaster for black. White simply keeps the queens on the board, pins a knight, the bishop cannot move, the rook is out of play, and white simply wants to take on d5, activate all of their remaining pieces, and if you look at the black king, it's so unsafe. White already has a crashing positional advantage. If you take on a4, you even give me ideas like this, basically, yeah, an invasion on f7 and so on. It's just a disaster for black to play this position. If you take on d4, this was a very wrong choice, and now you tell me, folks, I can rotate the board for you. It's black to play. Given the king's safety problems, what should black play in this position? You tell me. What is the most logical move given the king's safety factor? You're a great player if you came up with the move queen c5. That's the only way for black to survive. You're forcing a queen trade, thus you're safeguarding your king, right? Without those queens on the board, it won't be easy for white to exploit your weak king in this position. Plus, the knight joins the game with tempo on the bishop. You open up your bishop and so on, right? This is a beautiful transition for black. Black has no major problems here. And of course, great Alekhine, going back, great Alekhine has seen this, right? Has seen this idea for black. He looked at the king's safety, and that's why he chose the move queen c5, because now there is no way for black to force a queen trade. If you do this, well, we are not playing checkers, we are playing chess. I can even go invade the 8th rank, and now your king is truly suffering. Now we discussed these concepts, I will show you a very interesting position that has practical significance. Imagine black plays knight g6 in this position, folks. And the question is this: should white play g3 with the idea of limiting that knight on g6? Or do you think that's too weakening for your king on g1? Please stop the video and right now judge how good is this move g3 in relation to your king's safety, okay? Folks, you're a great player if you did not handwave and play the move g3. That's a great move. The knight is totally shut down from the game, right? And white is the bishop pair. They are very good bishops. And look at the black's queen side. White is having a clear advantage in this position. So you also play g3, of course, to stop ideas like knight f4, right? That knight could be an annoying piece on f4. So you play g3, you completely shut down that knight, and you claim a clear advantage for white. My student thought this was too weakening for his king, and he was hand waving. He was rejecting to play g3 out of those general principles. And here we are fighting against this tendency, because the question is this: how can black exploit this weakening of those light squares with their pieces sleeping on the queen side, right? A weakness is only a weakness if it can be exploited. How can black exploit it? That's the key question. There is no way for black to exploit slight weakening of these two squares, f3 and h3. Notice that black has no light square bishop in this position, right? That's another factor to observe for white. I can safely play g3 and control your pieces. There is no way for black to lift the rook to the king side, right? I mean, none of these ideas actually in the air. It won't be possible at all for black to play like that. And then we can even continue. h5. He was worried about this h4 resource for black. How dangerous is that anyways, right? First of all, I can let you play h4. I can do this, for example. Queen to h4, fine. Rook d3. And if you ever take my pawn, oh, thank you so much. It's now the black king who is facing difficulties, right? Look at this. No hand waving. Concrete calculation. h5, h4, and taking is completely ridiculous for black. And to conclude, I will show you two positions that are very typical in the middle games when the kings have castled on opposite flanks. I will make another video about pawn storms, but that's a good introduction, right? Pawn storm positions. It's a crucial factor in those positions to judge the king's safety properly, because the game will be decided by whose attack is coming first, right? At those moments, people just throw pushing pawns on the opposite flanks to open up lines for their pieces and to go for mating attacks. It's very brute force middle game positions that will emerge in such situations. So please take a moment, please stop the video and tell me, in this very position, whose king is safer. You're a great player, folks, if you came up with the idea that white king is so much safer. Why? Why? I would say it's because of the hook pawn on h6. Black pushed the pawn to h6, and now it will be much more easier for white to open up lines on the king side. g4, g5 is coming, and inevitably I will open up lines either by taking on h6, or you take and I take back with my h-pawn, and my rook will join the attack directly. You see it from this position, right, guys? That's what we are doing. We are learning to judge those factors correctly. In a position like this, already here, all the signals are there. The pawn on h6 is a hook pawn, and this is giving us a beautiful attacking chances on the king side. White has no hook pawns on the queen side. It won't be easy for black to open up the b file and the a file for their pieces. Thus, white is better. Plus, there's a d5 outpost that might be relevant after g4, g5, right? It's also about the pieces, of course. Yeah, I will chase your knight first, and then I will jump to d5 with my knight. Let's look how this works in a practical context, folks. Let's see black make some waiting moves. It's not ideal to play like this, but just to show you the point, g5 is on the board, and now things are opening up on the king side. And look at the black king. If black takes, that's a suicidal move, because now queen h2 is coming, and the game will be over once queen h2 is on the board, because if the knight moves, then queen h8 is made. That's a very one-directional brute force checkmate idea, but the mechanics is very simple, right? That's exactly how you should learn first. You should look at those variations that offer maybe the least resistance first, so you know, right, the dream context. The dream for white is this, something like this: g4, g5, takes, open up the h-file, get those heavy pieces to the h-file, and give mate. And this is already clearly visible from this position, I would say, right? You should see those signals that allow you to engage in mating attacks like this. Yes, black regrets pushing the pawn to h6 in this position. That's a hook pawn. That is almost always a bad thing in such sharp opposite side castling middle game positions. And now I will show you almost the same position with a minor difference. The black pawn stands on h7 in this position instead of h6. And you tell me right now, what are the differences? Do you think this favors black or white? If the pawns could go backwards in chess, the best move for black would probably be h6 back to h7, because now it won't be so easy for white to push g4, g5 and open up lines on the king side. And obviously this means more security for the black king, correct? Now the game is much more balanced actually. g4, black can go queen c4 because the queen trade is favoring black in this position. Well, after taking, there will be potential pressure, typical Sicilian pressure on the pawn on c2, right? b5, b4s are coming, so that definitely favors black here. And if white refuses the queen trade, then black will start pushing b4, chase away that knight that is fighting for the key d5 outpost, and this is basically how the game would continue. g5, should black play knight h5 in this position, or should black go for a counter-attacking move? Please stop the video here, folks, and judge for yourself. How would you defend with the black pieces here? Yes, oftentimes in such sharp positions, the best defense is not to move your piece that is attacked, but to go for a counter-attack on the other side of the board, right? That's a counter-attacking move that keeps fighting for the d5 outpost. If white jumps directly, obviously I will take on d5. You can't even take back because of this. And if you have to take back with the e-pawn, oh my god, you filled an outpost square with the pawn. That obviously favors black in this position. And after b4, well, what else you can do? If the knight drops back, then the knight is happy to, let's say, go to h5 and stop your h5 push, and black is completely fine in this typical Najdorf structure. So what did we learn from these two examples? Every single detail matters. A hook pawn changes everything because timing is very important in a position like that, and that hook pawn can be used for the opposing side to open up lines against the king, right? That's why chess is a very complex game. A minor change means the entire evaluation is very different. But engaging with such puzzles, by asking the why questions, by knowing how the mechanics of such pawn storms work after moves like h6 and g4, g5, you're becoming a much better player, and you will use those patterns and chunks that you learned in this video, and you'll apply it in your games in the right context. And this will be your homework position for this video, folks. It's a game between Keres and Botvinnik. Botvinnik with the black pieces, folks. I will ask you a very simple question. Would you castle long in this position? How insecure your king would be on the queen side if you castled long in this position? The question is this: black considers to castle long. You must judge the king's safety if the black king reaches the c8 square in this position. Please judge it properly, looking at the pawn structure. That will become a pawn storm position, let's say. The kings will be castled on opposite flanks, just like in the previous examples. I want you to judge in the long term, strategically, your king's safety in such position. I hope you enjoyed this video, folks. Again, I did it for multiple reasons. First, you're becoming a better evaluator by looking at the king's safety, because the king's safety is the #1 criterion in judging and evaluating any position. That will also improve your calculation skills, because without the proper evaluation, calculation is useless. And finally, what did we achieve with this video? We learned those typical middle game patterns, right? pawn storms, hook pawns, but they also form connections between the king safety and the queen trade. Because if you truly understand the king safety, then your strategic queen trade exchanges will also improve. And as you know, the queen trade is the most fundamental exchange in chess that changes everything. The entire dynamics will change after the queen trade. So this will also make you a better player strategically. If you want to explore this concept more, please check my Chessable course, The Art of Exchanging Pieces, that will drill those queen trade examples, and we are always connecting to the king safety. Forming connections is the best way of learning material that will give you long-lasting knowledge. You will not forget this knowledge tomorrow, okay? But of course, you will need to apply. You need to go to Chessable and solve those challenging exercises with nice annotations. That will take time, but if you do it properly, in the right way, your strategic play will improve. I can assure you, folks, I can fully assure you that after good practice with good positions, you will become a much better chess player and a much better analyst. And you will stop hand waving, you will stop those phantom fears because of the phantom fears around your king safety. And that was the final function of this video. I hope you got the right lessons. Please give me a like and subscribe if you like this video. That's very important for me to be able to produce similar content. And I will catch you on the next episode on similar themes. Bye bye.